Version 2 sat in the yard, under the light of the full moon. He'd had his fun, scaring a few of the family members in his own ways, letting them have tiny glimpses of him. He'd even staged a frightening photo on the camera he had seen the father checking shortly after he had first started stalking the family. Which was also how he had even learned what a game camera was. But he had already enjoyed himself enough. It was time for the real game to begin. If he wanted, he could have just slipped into the house and killed them all silently. But where was the fun in that? A few hours after the last light in the house was extinguished, Version 2 crept out of the forest and sat in the yard for a time before approaching the building. One of the cameras Adam had set up snapped a photo of him in full view, entering from the left of the frame and approaching the house on all fours, but Version 2 didn't care. None of them would live long enough to check the pictures. Drool dripping from his maw, he approached the house and sulked about the walls, sniffing the air. He stopped near the front porch, stood on his hind legs, and began climbing up onto the walls. He pulled himself up with several strong lunges, and soon he reached the roof. He climbed onto the top and settled on the apex, finding his balance, using his finger and toe claws as a way to anchor in place and steady himself, still sniffing the night air, waiting for the right moment to wake everyone inside the house up. And then his night of fun would begin. Maeve Wachowski was lying in her bed, unable to sleep, staring into her dark room with the blankets pulled practically all the way over her head. She wanted nothing more than to run from the house and back to Streetbart and Gamma, the ones who had believed her that there actually was something out there. The silence was broken by a sudden loud creaking, and another. Unusual sounds. Maeve had never heard the cabin make those sounds. And they were moving, she realized. She whimpered, pulling her blanket up tighter around herself, eyes darting around her dark bedroom. The creaking moved up the wall and onto the roof where it stopped. Maeve stared with wide eyes up at the dark ceiling, whimpering and close to having a panic attack. She was wide awake, but so scared that she couldn't make herself scream. Outside, silhouetted against the moon, the same moon that had witnessed the rise and extinction of the dinosaurs, that watched as early humans like Homo habilis, Agaster, and Erectus walked down the early path that led to humanity, that watched as humans rose and built civilization which ultimately fell, had watched the dinosaurs return from extinction, that had witnessed as both now shared the earth, the constant factor that overlooked it all, now looked down at Version 2. Shining its pale light on his black scales and armor, if there was ever a witness to ghosts, it would have been the moon, as it had witnessed every life and death that had ever come on the earth, from all the long distant ages of the past to the present moment. It watched ever silently as Version 2 steadied himself, stood up as best he was able to on the roof, and roared, an extremely loud, ear-piercing shrieking that tore through the night. The moonlight silhouetted his head and teeth, casting their shadow down onto the roof of the house. Maeve screamed, snapped out of her frozen state by the roar, and tumbled out of her bed at the sound. She heard her parents' bedroom door slam open as she sat up on the floor and worked to untangle herself from the blanket. Outside, Version 2, still perched on the roof, roared again, louder than his previous one. Adam realized from the direction that the sound was coming from that whatever was outside, it was on the roof, and he looked back into his dark bedroom. "Stay here. Load one of the other rifles," he shouted to Kalani, sprinting down the hall and passing Nolan's room as Nolan opened the door. "Dad?" Nolan asked. Adam stopped and grabbed his son by the shoulder. "Nolan, get your clothes on, stay here, and check on your sisters," he ordered, squeezing his son's shoulder before he took off through the living room. He grabbed the rifle that was left next to the window, ejected the shell in the chamber, made sure that the rifle was loaded, and ran to the front door. The roar from outside came again as Adam struggled to put his boots and vest on in the dark. As her father ran down the hallway, Mai freed herself, hearing Nolan's door close again. Panicked, she grabbed her red jacket, slid on her boots, and ran to her window, stopping to grab a wind-up flashlight from her big desk drawer. Keeping the light off, she climbed outside and fell into the dried rose bush that was outside her window. She crept into the yard, just far enough to make sure the monster on the roof wasn't looking at her. And once she was sure it wasn't, she took off for the woods, light still off, running faster than she had ever run before. She reached the trees in no time and turned the light on, winding it up enough just so that she could make sure she wasn't going to run into anything, and then kept running. In record time, she cleared the distance to the cave shaft. Stumbling around the opening, Maeve half ran, half danced over to a tree. She dropped her flashlight, grabbed the box of matches from inside the hole, and struck one. Double-checking that his rifle had enough ammunition, Adam, dressed and prepared, crept to the door, gun already pointing forward. He took a deep breath to prepare himself and calm his racing nerves, and then he reached for the door's latch. Outside, Version 2 shifted his position, his large claws dislodging and sending a few roof tiles sliding down towards the ground. Version 2 growled, watching them fall to the ground before he reared his head back and roared again towards the starry sky. He'd stay right where he was for however long it took to draw someone from the family outside. It would be easier than breaking inside right away, which he could have easily done. But it was more fun to have them, the food, come to him instead. Maeve set the fuse to the fireworks alight, dropped the match, and began running back through the trees, leaving the flashlight because she couldn't find it. Its light must have run down and clicked off, and she knew she didn't have time to search around for it with how many fireworks were about to be shot off. The only thing Maeve could do was sprint towards home and hope that she didn't run into anything. Nolan opened Katrina's door, flashlight in his hand as well, and he spotted her sitting up on her bed, terrified. He nodded to her and left, leaving the door open, and went to Maeve's room. He opened it and found it empty, with the window wide open. Katrina watched her brother leave her room, crying from terror as he did. The thing outside on the roof roared again and Katrina screamed, covering her ears to block the sound. She had never been so scared in her entire life. It was this kind of paralyzing fear that her father had said she wasn't ready for. He had been right. She understood that now. Helping her dad on the boat had filled her with confidence, which now had all been torn away. Katrina's view of what the wider world must have been like had changed completely. It was no longer this exciting, mysterious thing that her brother always got to experience instead of her. It was just scary. The horrors that waited out there were no longer far away in a wide world, however. They had come to the Wachowski home. The world had finally thrown something back at them. Version 2's roar was cut off as a sudden bright series of rockets flew into the air in the distance and exploded above the forest. He wheeled his head around and stared over his shoulder in that direction. Several alarmed pterosaurs and various birds began flying out of the trees and away from the area, visible in the colorful flashes of light that filled the night sky as they vanished into the sky. Version 2 paid the squawking animals no mind. His attention was focused on the source of the flying reptiles' collective alarm. The quills on the back of his head rose like hackles as he glared. Adam threw the front door open and sprinted across and off the porch, carrying his rifle in both hands, as a series of fireworks suddenly shot off to his right in the distant woods. Still running, he briefly turned his head to look in that direction, but he couldn't be worried right now with whoever had set them off. He faced forward again and stopped his sprint and spun around to face what was on the roof of the house. Kalani, meanwhile, now armed herself, watched Adam sprint out of the house. Once he was off the porch, she slammed the door shut behind him and prayed that everything would be okay. As she spoke to whatever higher power she wasn't sure if she really believed in or not, begging for deliverance, she slid a bullet into the chamber of the rifle and aimed the gun at the door. She briefly had a memory flash into her mind from years prior that occurred in that exact spot. Her and Adam holding the door closed while aggressive, gigantic primates tried to force it open. She took a breath to steady herself, and it passed. And she knew that she could face it, whatever it was. Even if an entire siege of Dinopithecus were out there, she could face it down and it wouldn't get her kids. Her worst fear would not come to pass. Her worst nightmare was not going to happen. She would not let it. Streak Bart and Gamma all jerked awake and leapt to their feet, seeing the show of fireworks blasting into the sky. The raptors all looked at each other for a moment, and then took off at full speed in the direction of the house. Adam's eyes widened. He couldn't believe it. It was the same dinosaur that he thought he'd killed on the beach. Apparently he hadn't been successful, and it was no longer a weak and seemingly dying creature, but one at the peak of its strength. And it appeared to be just as dangerous as he had feared it would be. The dinosaur was sitting on the roof, clinging on with the claws on its hands and feet. It was looking down at him, though, its head partially silhouetted in the moon, snarling, its glowing eyes deranged, wild, and locked, unblinking on Adam. Adam didn't wait a moment more. He raised the gun and fired at the animal. Version 2 felt the bullet strike above his shoulder, but the Dunkleosteus armor deflected the shot, causing the bullet to bounce harmlessly off and roll down the roof. Snarling, Version 2 relaxed the grip of his claws on the tiles, and he slid down the slanted surface to the end of the roof, where he jumped down onto the ground, landing on all fours. He roared, tail swinging, eyes still locked on Adam. Adam stared at the dinosaur, his own eyes wide as well. He fired again, this time at the animal's head, but there was no effect at all on the dinosaur, which had begun to slowly prowl closer. Adam fired 2 more times, and both times the shots bounced off Version 2's skull, and he continued to prowl closer, snarling all the while. Adam just stared, unable to believe that the bullets were doing no good. He fired yet another shot at the dinosaur's head, aimed right between its eyes, but that bullet too just bounced harmlessly off the armor covering the thing's head without leaving so much as a scratch. For a brief moment, though it seemed to go on forever, the two stared into each other's eyes. Version 2 growled softly, enjoying the satisfaction he was feeling at finally reaching this moment. "What the fuck are you?" Adam eventually asked. Still snarling, Version 2 stopped moving and snorted in a manner which resembled a chuckle. "The monster your daughter saw at her bedroom window. And I've come for all of you." For a moment, it was like there was a respite as Adam took in what the thing had said. Version 2 then charged, springing forward on all fours with great speed, and Adam turned and ran into the nearest line of trees, fleeing into the forest. The fireworks were long over now, and whatever flashing, dancing, yet illuminating and helpful light they might have given off was over as well, and the forest was plunged into a black void. Panicked, Adam stumbled and fumbled his way through the trees, the mad-sounding roars of the dinosaur getting closer and closer no matter how quickly he ran. In the dark, he tripped over a large root and his rifle went flying from his grasp. It vanished in the woods somewhere off to his side, but Adam couldn't waste time trying to find it. He got to his feet and kept running, Version 2 following just a few seconds behind him. Hey everyone, it's Enderman with a lowercase e. I haven't actually said my name out loud in a while. Well, that was the end of the Survivor's Daily Routine series, for real this time. Just like with Twilight Ends being the last narration I'm doing following Nick and Spino's storyline in the first book, this is the last one following the plot of the spinoff. It has, as a whole, the series has covered all the rising action and setup, and now you got a taste of what is going to be happening in the third act. I felt like you deserved a glimpse after 5 episodes of this story, building up the tension with it only ever rising and rising more and more. But now you have to sit on this cliffhanger until the book comes out, just like the cliffhanger on the end of Twilight Ends. I had fun narrating this, though. I'm proud of this novella, and I think it's a really fun standalone expansion of the world I established in the first book. And version 2 is my favorite character in the whole story, so I always love getting to do another narration with him as the star dinosaur character. But goodness gracious, he is the hardest to put a voice to. I re-recorded his limited lines so many times, you have no idea. Like, voicing characters like Nick, Spino, Ness, Shadow, the Wachowskis is not hard. But man, version 2 is just so difficult to put a voice to, and I don't know why. Like, everyone else, I know the voice I imagine him having, kind of this soft-spoken, raspy voice that can get deep when he wants to, and when he puts emphasis on certain words. But it's just hard to actually do that voice in the way I imagine it. And heck, that was just the closest I got to it. It wasn't quite right either. I wasn't fully satisfied with it, but what you heard near the end there was a combination of 2 takes, which I thought were the best. Anyway, go listen to the other narrations that I've done. The ones that are set in the same universe, and I'll see you in the next one. Wave 4 of narrations is officially on, which will be the last wave before the first book comes out. And if you're new, these are all read from the rough drafts of books that I'm going to publish. Some things are subject to change for that reason, and some things are altered or added for the audio versions as well, just to make things easier. Because obviously listening to a story is different than reading a story. Some scenes get cut or shortened or altered compared to how they're in the book, so just keep that in mind. But I do hope you check out the books when they release. I've said it before, wanted to be an author my whole life, writing is my passion. The one thing that's never just been a passing fancy of mine, so yeah. It would mean a lot if you did check them out. Until next time, have a good one, and I'll see you in the next video.